Welcome to Mortification of Spin, a casual conversation about things that count, with Carl Trueman and Todd Pruitt, a podcast of the Alliance of Confessing Evangelicals. Let's join this week's conversation.
You are listening to Mortification of Spin, and my name is Todd Pruitt. With you as always, I am the pastor of Covenant Presbyterian Church in Harrisonburg, Virginia. And I'm joined as always by my friend Carl Trueman, who is a professor at Grove City College, this year, though, on loan from Grove City over to the Fighting Irish University of Notre Dame. And as far as I know, Carl is still a Protestant, though, correct, Carl?
I am, yes, despite the rumors.
Yeah, and you know, to make matters even more interesting, Carl, you have, from what I understand, just written a piece on the church calendar for World Magazine. I'm sure that will be up very soon. And I thought we'd kick around the whole notion of the church calendar, what we mean when we talk about the church calendar, what it is, and the fact that at least certainly in the Puritan tradition of Reformed Protestantism, the church calendar has not been a thing. I mean, the church calendar is Sunday, yeah. Right? But the Reformed tradition in general is broader than just that. But it's hotly contested in kind of our little world of Reformed Protestantism. You have some that like the church calendar for various reasons. Others who very much think once you embrace the church calendar, you're not Presbyterian anymore. Presbyterianism absolutely has no place for the church calendar, although I think the history is a little bit more complicated than that. Tell me, give us a little bit of a preview, although by the time this airs, the article will be out. But at this point, give me a little bit of a preview of where you are on first of all, what is the church calendar? Yeah. And then kind of where you've come on that issue.
The church calendar originates in the ancient church, and it was really a liturgical structuring of the year, where particular events in biblical history, or even the lives of particular saints, would be remembered at certain times. And it's still very much part of Eastern Orthodoxy, Roman Catholicism, and indeed traditional Book of Common Prayer Anglicanism. In the 17th century, as you rightly point out, the Puritans in England particularly objected to it, though the major objection was the fact that the government was attempting to impose it using the force of law.
Right.
So it was not so much an objection to the idea that, it isn't useful for the church to focus on particular doctrines on particular Sundays, and more a matter of church-state discipline and relations. And I would say, to sort of, before I give my own view on this, I want to say that I certainly would not regard observation of the church calendar as something required for Christian obedience, or something that one cannot do if one's an obedient Christian. I think observation of the church calendar should be a matter of, should we say, congregational conscience. Mm-hmm. My own view on it has softened over the years, in that I used to be very much the Puritan. We have a liturgical calendar. It's called Sunday. I've changed my opinion, partly because I became convinced that a major part of the problem was the government overreach involved in 17th century England. And a second part of it is, as you point out, the Reformed tradition is a little more nuanced than the Puritans. Take, for example, the Heidelberg Catechism. Heidelberg Catechism is divided into 52 Lord's Days. Why? Because the Heidelberg Catechism implicitly acknowledges that it's impossible to cover the whole counsel of God on every given Sunday. Right. That the whole counsel of God involves a whole host of doctrinal heads and points. And really they can be covered, perhaps reasonably covered over a 12-month period. So I would say, first of all, liturgical calendar is a good way of dividing up the whole counsel of God in such a way that we can make sure the whole thing is more or less covered in a particular period of time. And then I would also say that the rhythm of the year actually helps reinforce some of the truths that we're teaching. It's interesting, this only applies in the Northern Hemisphere, of course, but your Christmas occurs at the darkest moments of the year. What a powerful way of thinking about the light bursting into the darkness and the darkness not overcoming it, when it's actually your experience at that moment in time. So I think the liturgical calendar has, I would say, pedagogically reinforcing advantages to it. Now, again, just to backtrack to what I said a few moments ago, that is not to say that a church decides, no, we're not going to observe the liturgical calendar, or, the one Sunday in the year that you can't preach on the incarnation is the Sunday before or after Christmas. It's not saying you're sinning necessarily in doing that, but I'm saying that there are pedagogical advantages. There are also outreach advantages as well, to the extent that the culture has an increasingly faded memory of Christianity. You might get people showing up to your church the Sunday before or after Christmas, and it's a great opportunity to hit them with the central truth of the Christian gospel, which is the incarnation, and to sing, I would say, the greatest Christological hymns of the Christian tradition.
Right.
Hymns like, "O come all ye faithful, hark the herald angels sing."
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've thought of, I'm a traditional Presbyterian, but we do, at this time of year, right now we're recording this, it's first week of December, there are some years where I'll preach 3 sermons in a row. I think a few years I've done 4 sermons in a row leading up to the closest Sunday to Christmas, focusing on the doctrine of Advent, going back to some of the messianic prophecies and then coming up into the birth narratives. Some years I don't do that. Some years I do. And what I explain to our congregation is that, look, there's nothing inherently there's nothing inherently holy about this season. However, we have one holy day. It's the Lord's Day. However, it can often be, and I think it is typically helpful, when you have a doctrine as important, as central, as mysterious as the incarnation, to let the calendar kind of serve it up to you on a silver platter to say, instruct your people in this for a few weeks. I think it's a great thing. I think it's a way of looking at the calendar and saying, the Lord owns all of the calendar. And this particular season gives us an opportunity to make sure we're not neglecting the incarnation, which at some points in history kind of almost had been done in the Western Church. Eastern Church, incarnation is it. Western Church, we're great on the cross, but at times in history have kind of neglected the incarnation. I think we're correcting that. But the church calendar sort of helps that. And I would say also that as one who doesn't make a big deal about the church calendar, in acknowledging things like the Christmas season and Holy Week, it could be a way of beginning or helping or bridging into certain conversations with people that very few unbelievers don't acknowledge Christmas in some way. Yeah. And it could be a wonderful opportunity. We always have, for instance, lots of guests at our Christmas Eve service. And people who we don't, and so we leverage that to really proclaim the gospel. So I look at it in a pragmatic way, but as in a sense that it's positive in a pragmatic way. Now, let me get a little bit more complicated with you. For me, the Christmas season, that's just kind of easy, and that might be for my own, just because of my own cultural preferences. But when it comes to, say, Lent or the Lenten season, that's where I get heartburn because of what Lent means and what typically how the Catholic Church has taught about Lent. Unpack that a little bit.
Yeah, I think Lent is a little different in the grounds. I mean, first of all, again, I think what Lent intends to teach is a good thing.
Right.
That Lent
Right.
is to teach us self-denial, and that's an
Yes.
important aspect of Christian life. And you might say, well, shouldn't we be self-denying every day? Well, yes, but there's a particular power to doing it sort of especially at certain occasions.
Being
So
deliberate rather than just
being
looking at it
deliberate.
conceptually,
Yeah,
but actually
yeah.
being deliberate.
Yeah, I mean, I have to laugh. One of my lasting memories, actually, of Lent was a couple of years ago. Katrina and I were in Rome on vacation with some friends. Happens to be a PCA pastor and his wife. We were in a restaurant off the Campo di Fiore, and a group of English-speaking priests came in and sat at the table. And the guy brought the wine menu, and they all looked at each other and they said, "Well, we're not meant to drink wine. It's Lent." And then one of them, the senior one, said, "Yeah, but if you won't tell, I won't tell." And so they pulled out the wine, and it was a sort of, fulfilling every Protestant stereotype
Right,
of
of
Catholic
course.
priest. It was entertaining to watch, and they seemed like a fine, pleasant bunch of fellows. I think when it becomes a form of righteousness, that's the problem with the liturgical calendar.
Right.
When you start saying, if you don't do this, you're somehow a defective Christian. And it seems to me the liturgical calendar, in terms of what topics we teach on, is a little less likely to be susceptible to that kind of self-righteousness than something like Lent is. Having said that, there are those in our tradition, Todd, for whom, not preaching on the incarnation at Christmas is a sign of righteousness. It's
That's
a sign
right.
that they get the truth and you don't.
Right.
So I think we need to be aware that the real problem here is not the liturgical calendar or the rejection of the liturgical calendar. It's how fallen human nature uses one of those two stands to make us feel superior to that guy over there.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And you'll see on X various posts right around both Christmas and Easter, where some of my fellow Presbyterians will say, another Easter Sunday where I didn't preach on the resurrection, mission accomplished sort of thing. And I think, well, man, let's look for excuses to preach on the resurrection.
Yeah.
How about that?
Yeah. I would say when I was a pastor, and I wouldn't do this now, but I typically did not change my roster of consistent expository preaching for the seasons.
Yeah.
And one notorious year, the Sunday before Christmas, I preached on that famous verse in Judges, and then came Shamgar, son of Anath, who killed 600 Philistines with an ox goad. But I made it a Christmas sermon. I got the incarnation and the Advent out of it. So I allowed the seasons of the year to at least steer my emphases in the exposition.
Right. Well, this is really funny because I've been preaching through Revelation. I'm this Sunday will be my 25th sermon on Revelation, and we're in the last half of chapter 11.
I think you're going to say you're in chapter 1 then. You've only done.
Oh yeah, exactly. No, we're in the last half of chapter 11, where the seventh seal is sounded, and then the mighty song from the heavenly host. The kingdom of this world has become the kingdom of our Lord and of his Christ, and he shall reign forever and ever. So it's a great, for a quote, Advent sermon, but it's right along. And then the next Sunday is chapter 12, and the woman and the beast who's going after to destroy the child. Be able to tie that in. And then the next Sunday, which is the Sunday directly before Christmas, I am going to preach probably from one of the birth narratives, because I want to. I like it. We need those reminders, and I think part of the goal here is to not bind people's conscience. So as you've said, we don't turn the church calendar into this thing of you have to observe this and all of these days in this way, and at the same time, if a pastor or if a church wants to put a special emphasis on Jesus's first advent in the month of December, why would we, or what warrant would we have to bind their conscience not to do that? I mean, I just don't think we have any biblical warrant at all not to do that.
No. And as Presbyterian ministers, we're bound by oath to uphold the standards of worship.
Right.
I can't just abandon the basic liturgical form or
Right.
structure to which I'm committed. I can't ignore
Exactly.
church law.
Yeah.
But within that, I have a lot of flexibility. And I would also add that, my comment about the carols, Christological hymns, my experience of churches where they don't make a special thing about Christmas is you never get to sing those carols.
Right.
Any other time of the year. And they are some of the most, born that man no more may die.
Hark the Herald Angels Sing is one of the greatest hymns ever written.
Oh, come on, ye faithful, and hark the herald angels sing. You have the Nicene Creed.
Absolutely.
Sung to beautiful tunes by the beautiful voices of Christians in praise of their God.
Yep. Yeah, it's a great, and again, do these kinds of things, obviously, preach doctrine throughout the year, but I feel like what acknowledging the fact that this is the Christmas season and calling it the Advent season, I think the advantage that gives me is I'm able to say, look, it's that time of year where we're once again going to step into the deep waters of Christian doctrine. It doesn't get deeper than the incarnation, and it's a privilege and a joy to get to do that. And there's something anticipatory about it. If a pastor puts in the work and really studies to bring the Word of God in a powerful, clear, really powerfully communicated way, this is a blessing to God's people. And again, some of my brothers will say, well, but according to the regulative principle, we're only allowed to worship in ways that we're directly commanded to. And since we're not commanded to observe, quote, Christmas, then we're adulterating worship if we do. Now, what do you say to that?
Well, I would say we're adulterating worship if we command people to do it. It's if we make it, yes, Christmas is on one level a matter indifferent. You can be a faithful, God-honoring church and just preach on Shamgar, son of Anath, on December the 23rd. Right. You can do that. We only dishonor God. We only breach the regulative principle if we make that which is not essential into something essential. It would be analogous to me saying, okay, if you don't have your morning worship service at 11 o'clock on a Sunday morning, you're sinning. No, you're not. You can have it at 9:30. I think you need to have a Sunday morning worship service if reasonably possible any given day. If it's snowed in or whatever, things might change. But when we start to make things that are morally neutral or indifferent into things that we either have to do or have to avoid, then that's when you cross the line.
Right.
I would say it's not breaching the regulative principle to sing carols and preach on the birth narratives the Sunday before Christmas.
Mm-hmm. Now, in the church I serve, we don't quote and we don't follow the church calendar. An Anglican would say we don't follow the church calendar. I'll put it that way. Though, we use the term Advent. We have an Advent reading every Sunday morning, beginning in the last Sunday of November. And then we observe Holy Week the way a Presbyterian might. In other words, we have a Maundy Thursday service on Thursday evening with a meal and the Lord's Supper. We have a Good Friday service where we preach the crucifixion, and then
but you're
of course
not disciplining. You wouldn't be disciplining members who didn't show up for that.
Absolutely not.
So you're not making it an essential part of the faith.
No. If for whatever reason you're thinking, man, I just don't think the church ought to have a Maundy Thursday service. Well, you can talk to us about that. You certainly don't have to attend. It's not the Lord's Day. It's another opportunity for us to gather as saints and to meditate on and hear from God's word. Particularly that night on Jesus's experience with his disciples in the upper room. But we do that now. We don't do Ash Wednesday. We don't apply ashes. We'll never do that. I was
about to ask that.
Not going to do that.
And then I think there's a difference, because I think the application of ashes is a bit like, it's even more intense than Lent, if you like. There is a certain ascription of significance to that.
Yes,
that it's hard to to rid yourself from as a Presbyterian. You are crossing over into very much another tradition that does apply very distinct significance to that act.
Exactly. And so, so those are, those 2 years, we talk about Holy Week because we have several services that week, and then, the Advent. And so, like I said, a Presbyterian would say, oh, you sort of follow the church calendar. Well, I mean, I say from the pulpit, our church calendar is a weekly cycle of days, which begins on the Lord's Day. That's our church calendar. But we're also pleased and happy to celebrate in a special way Christ's first Advent every year this season. We think that's worth celebrating. The angels certainly did that night outside of Bethlehem and the hills surrounding Bethlehem. They thought it was worth putting an exclamation point by it. We certainly think that it's worthy to give special emphasis once again to those events surrounding the crucifixion and resurrection of Jesus. And again, one of the things I explain to our church is we preach the resurrection. We preach the crucifixion and resurrection every Sunday. The crucifixion and resurrection finds its way into our services every Sunday of the year. And so again, that's our church calendar. But I've heard some Anglican friends, some conservative kind of Reformed Anglican friends. I'm not convinced, but I'm moved by their argument of the church calendar being a discipleship tool in terms of the kind of doctrinal emphases that come along. How have you thought about that? You've mentioned it a little bit, but I wonder if you could unpack it a little bit further.
Well, on one level, it's analogous to the Heidelberg Catechism. I mean, there's that. I think there's also, and it's hard to quantify this, but I think I'm always struck by Dorothy L. Sayers' comment, that the dogma is the drama. There's a dramatic dimension to Christian teaching. And the rhythm of the church year, the rhythm of the church service should reflect that drama. So There should be a call to worship, reading of the law, confession of sin, congregational prayer, declaration, all those elements that should be there. But I also think that perhaps works at a sort of macro annual level as well, that the rhythm of the church year brings out in a deeper way the gospel, or the drama of the gospel. Like I said, we have Christmas, certainly in the Northern Hemisphere, at the darkest part of the year. The very elements themselves seem to be pressing in on us the truth of what's being articulated from the pulpit. Easter, around about the time when we, certainly in Western Pennsylvania or Indiana, I hope in Indiana, we move from the brutalities of winter to suddenly the fresh green shoots. What a time to talk about the resurrection.
Right.
Again, not to say that you can't teach these things any time of the year.
Of course.
But there's a rhythm, there's a drama to nature itself that we can capitalize on if we so choose in order to press home the truths of the gospel.
Yeah, I like that. And again, you're not suggesting, I wouldn't suggest that anybody's conscience bound to do that. However, I think that there is something salutary about this time of year, every year, when spring rolls around and Holy Week. There's something about acknowledging those moments in the calendar that help us once again to say the Lord is the Lord of time. He's the Lord of our calendars. We know that from a micro level. Every week we're reminded that our time belongs to the Lord. He structured our time by a week. And we can certainly see that at the macro level as well, and it can be helpful to do that. And so I'm still a Presbyterian. We don't adhere to the church calendar in a formal way. However, we do acknowledge and happily celebrate the birth of Christ this time of year every year. We do happily celebrate and observe the significance of his resurrection every spring. We do that every Sunday too. I mean, it's pretty ordinary at the call to worship on any given Sunday for me to announce to the people, this is Resurrection Day. Every Sunday, every Lord's Day is Resurrection Day. Yeah. But there's nothing wrong with joining in with the worldwide church, and also, during the spring, and acknowledging that news as well, and worshiping in those categories with our brothers and sisters around the world. So.
And I'm
anyway,
basically in agreement with you on that, Todd. Yeah. Proof that idiots can change their minds, in my case. So. Anyway,
and I would just say one last thing I would say.
Keep it short. Carol, one last thing.
If you don't, preach on anything related to the Advent or the birth of Christ this Sunday, if you're a pastor and you don't do that, that's fine. You can do that. I would say if you go to social media to boast about it, then you might be as bad as the guy condemning you for not observing the church calendar.
You simply have your own liturgical calendar built in opposition to the formalized one.
Right.
Actually, I would say if you boast about anything on social media, you're as bad as everybody else on social media. But we'll leave that discussion for another day. Mm-hmm. Anyway, it's been great to have this discussion. We hope it's proved helpful. Even if there are those out there who will now think we are woefully compromised and halfway on our way to Rome or Constantinople, as the case may be. All that remains is for me to thank you for joining us. Oh, and I forgot the giveaway. The giveaway we will be giving away a couple of copies of Kevin DeYoung's wonderful spin-off from his beautifully illustrated children's storybook Bible, entitled simply Advent. The title, I'm sure, tells you exactly what the book is. It's a series of children's readings to introduce your kids to that greatest moment and miracle in history, the moment when God of God and light of light took human flesh, frail human flesh, and was born in a manger and placed in a manger in Bethlehem. So please go to our website, enter for a chance to win that. While you're there, please do consider making a donation. We are a listener-supported podcast. Other than that, all that remains is for me to thank you once again for being with us and say that we look forward to being with you again next time.
Everything must go by. There's still no one saying goodbye, though another year has gone by.
Thanks for listening to Mortification of Spin, a podcast of the Alliance of Confessing Evangelicals. For more on topics like this, visit mortificationofspin.org, where you can find other articles by Carl and Todd, browse the archive of past episodes, and make a donation. We'll talk to you next time on Mortification of Spin.